Hey, welcome back to another episode of Seven Figure Music School. This is the next episode in a series of episodes that we are doing on company culture. Last week, we opened the series defining what is culture. Today, we're going to be looking at a topic that on the surface is one of those words that I say to school owners and their eyes glaze over because they don't understand just how important it is. So instead of like trying to convince you of how important it is, I'm gonna set up a scenario here, Nate. Okay.
Okay, love it.
All the time, I hear school owners tell me two things. First off, I can't trust my staff to do anything. Like I
Right.
give them, they make bad decisions, or when I try to give them more responsibility, they screw it up.
Okay.
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 And then the other thing that they tell me is that they're very, very busy. And so they are doing all the really, really important things. And they don't have
Right.
time to get everything done. And I'm going to tell you that if both of these sound like you and your life and the experience of running your business, then you 150,000% need to listen to this episode today. Because what we're talking about today is how decisions get made and how that is directly related to the culture that you have in your school.
Nice. This is also one of those episodes where we're going to be asking you to do some exercises. So you might want to be taking notes on this. And you know how when you're listening to that great book or you're reading that great book that's transformative for your life, Daniel, and they say, now is the time to do the exercise. Stop listening and start doing, or stop reading and do the exercise. For our listeners, I challenge you. How often have you actually done the exercise? Right? There is no point there's just no point in pounding through podcast after podcast without letting it move your mind in some real way. And this episode we're doing, this whole series, Daniel, on company culture is not meant to be filed away in the infotainment column. It's literally meant to get you jump started in establishing the culture of your school. So it's a good one, and it all starts with the core values. That's where we are today.
And there it is, the core values. So last week we started the episode, or somewhat started the episode, these short episodes that we're doing, just defining culture. Nate, could you start us out by defining what core values are? Or in the absence of defining it, perhaps just telling people what core values are?
Yeah, totally. So when we're talking about core values, I'm going to use a BMF example just to bring it home here so we can dive into it. But when I say a quality or an intention that we're trying to live and teach by when we're at the school, what I mean is something like one of our core values is be 100% engaged intellectually and emotionally. That's one of our 7 core values. What does that mean? It's all about mindfulness and presence. So in a very simple way, it means when we show up to BMF to teach, we're not distracted. Much like when we show up to play a gig, we have to leave whatever issues we have at the door when we get onto the stage, right? Same thing, we leave them at the door when we go to Brooklyn Music Factory to teach or to be in a meeting, etc. So that's what we mean by a core value, is basically like, what's the intention we're setting when we show up to the job site? Now, here's the deal. People oftentimes confuse it as like an enormous amount of pressure that we then have to move through our day with. Nobody is saying that we're going to crush all 7 core values at BMF every day. But what we are saying is that we're showing up with these values, which is the criteria that we're going to lean into around when it comes time to making choices, like you said, at work, and how to present ourselves and how to act and how to engage with others. It's okay if you're having a tough day and only 5 of those 7 are really shining, or 3 of those 7 are really shining. The important thing is that we actually have some sort of set criteria that we all agree as a community on, through which we're going to operate, right? So that's what we mean by core values, really around an intention.
And what I want to add to that to connect back to what I said at the beginning, is when you're running a school or studio at first, perhaps it's just you or you and maybe one or two other people, but especially when it's just you, you're operating from your being. You're operating from who you are. You are completely congruent with the values that you embody. So when you make decisions as an entrepreneur, they are congruent with who you're being, what you think the rules are for the business. There is no delay between, or there's very little delay between a decision that needs to be made and the apparatus inside your brain that makes that decision. And that decision is congruent. The problem is when you start growing, when you start scaling, when you scale up, now you have a bunch of ambassadors for you, and they're called teachers, and they're called marketing specialists, and they're called admins and desk workers and building managers, and they're now having to make decisions. And if you expect them to make decisions well, they must completely understand what the core values are of the business. And I will add on to that something that was taught to me by one of my mentors, decision-making guidelines. And so, Nate, I know that our intent in this episode in rounding out all the things that go into making the company culture is for us to really examine core values and decision-making guidelines, show people what they look like. I'm gonna personally give some practical examples of this. Nate, I don't know what surprises you have in store. And then I think the assignment at the end will be for people to take the examples that we're giving and to begin to define that for themselves. And it would not surprise me if we got maybe some communication, some emails from owners who are doing $250,000 a year, $500,000 a year, $750,000 a year in revenue saying, you know what, we've never done anything like this before.
Yeah.
I've just been telling people, you need to do this. And people are remembering what I tell them, but it's messy. And I got to tell you, when you're operating in that way and you're operating from a framework that is very off the cuff, shooting from the hip, it's tough to scale a business in a emotionally healthy way when you are operating from that frame.
Yeah. Would you mind sort of defining, and what was the origin story for decision-making guidelines with you, Daniel? And just maybe you could give us one or two examples from Grow or from your previous studio just to frame it for us.
Yeah. Decision-making guidelines are different from core values. You define core values really, really well. I think my own definition of them, what my mentor gave me was just that this is kind of the heart of the business, and the decision-making guidelines are the brain of the business.
Oh, nice.
That core values are kind of, I hate to say intuitive, or because they are defined, but core values have more to do with what you deeply believe to be true, and decision-making guidelines are more for your team members to know. In a 50-50 situation where there's maybe two different directions they could go, the decision-making guidelines will help them to understand, we need to go down this pathway, not that pathway. But this is very abstract. Why don't I just show you?
Give us a couple of examples.
Yeah,
I've seen yours before, but I'd love for you to share with our listeners.
Well, let me actually, obviously, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Downcast, any of these services, you're not going to be able to see this, but we do release this on YouTube. Every episode that we've ever created, we've released on the Grow Your Music Studio YouTube channel. So you can definitely go over there if you want to see this, but I will, of course, read it as well, just to be super friendly. But I'm going to put the core values and decision-making guidelines, the very first ones that I ever wrote, way back for my studio. And I wrote these because I was hiring contractors and admins, and I had people, and even when I worked with a web design company who redesigned my company's website, I showed them this.
Nice.
Specifically the core values. So these were the core values, and then my mentor said you need to write core value stories that go along with it.
Yeah, I love that. Because
the core values themselves, they could be misinterpreted. So if you give examples of them, people can really make that head to heart connection. So let me just show this first one here, and it's on screen. Be the best. Never stop improving. Never stop finding a better way to do things. This applies to systems, instruction, communication, or marketing. So here are my core value stories for that. In the early days of the studio, I found that students would struggle with certain concepts. I systematically, in my 20s, tried many different ways of teaching these concepts. And I did not stop experimenting until I found a way that made things simple for all of my students. And then I didn't write this down. I'll just add this on. And then once I found a way of teaching, I locked that in. I would always teach it the exact same way, because I don't want to just be experimenting on students. They deserve the best. I have shown up committed to being the best for them. And if I know something works and it works really, really well, it's actually a dereliction of my duty to, if I'm bored of teaching half notes this way, or if I'm bored of teaching 16th notes this way, it's a dereliction of duty for me to just decide, oh, I'm bored today. Let me try a different way of teaching 16th notes. That is underserving my students. This is what it means to be the best. I'll read one more. For over 5 years, I knew that I should have students participate in some sort of outside judged event, but I was never happy with the local judgings. And when I discovered the Royal Conservatory's music development program, which is what it was called at the time, I instantly put my studio into this rigorous world-class system. I wanted my students to participate in one of the toughest achievement systems in the world. Okay, so why am I writing these? Do I need to come and read my core values every day to remind myself that I did these things? No, this is for the benefit of the team that I'm working with. This is so they understand what drives Daniel. And this is the beginning of culture. This is the beginning of them understanding the heart of the business.
I love the idea of putting your values in a story. And you did it really nicely there. And actually, you literally bolded the part where you said, under be the best, you were like, I want my students to be, challenged in a world-class way. And so you're saying, like, it's not just be the best Daniel as their mentor and guide and teacher. It's be the best pervades every experience within your school, in your studio, right? So it's going to be reflected in your students. And what I would say is, I wrote down while you were talking there, I was like, oh, where do I practice these stories? When do I have the opportunity as a leader or a founder? And it's at our monthly all staff. And actually, when we were doing the forum live in Brooklyn just I think it was only a week and change ago, though it seems like a month ago, we had we had Ben, our private lesson director, as a guest. He delivered this great program on meetings that matter. And he was talking about how every all staff meeting is themed with one of our core values, right? And when you were talking about the value stories, I was like, oh, this is exactly when I practice telling a core value story every month. I literally prepare them, and so what I would do is, let's say I was a teacher at your studio and you were like, Nate, I want you to give a story about a student. I would actually say, I would frame the story of one of my students going through the RCM challenge and maybe scoring a perfect score on something. And I would be like, we're so proud of so-and-so because this is exactly how she exemplifies our value of being the best. And so it's not a story for story's sake. It's not a story just to highlight a student's achievement. It's a story to make sure that we're tying in those core values and how we're all meant to operate within our school. And what my mentor said to me, and I've mentioned this before on the pod, but it's important here especially, is he's like, Nate, there's nothing more important for you as a leader to do in your school, actually, than to tell stories around the core values. In fact, your teachers and staff need to they need to hear you talk about core values so often that they start rolling their eyes, right? Because the whole point is that, back to your comment, Daniel, is that this is your being that you're just doing, you've intuited and you're doing naturally, but it's not theirs.
Right.
Right. And they signed up to be part of this community, this business, this small business that you're building, that you're the founder of. And so your job is to be like, I'm reminding you over and over and over again, the values with which we're going to operate here in this thing we're building together.
Yeah. Now, I want to add on one thing to complement what you're saying there, and then I want to talk about the decision-making guidelines, which is actually your original question to me.
Oh, right. We haven't gotten to the lower part of your sheet.
Yeah, we haven't even gotten it yet. There. I do want to point one thing out. I didn't choose these core values because I thought they sounded cool. These
Right.
are deep embodiments of what I believe to be true for myself, for the business, and as you mentioned, even for people who are participating in the business. So the core values, again, there is no delay for me. This is just how I think. This is my brain on paper. So be the best was the first one. Follow the system. I'm just going to read this, but I won't go into the stories. The business runs on systems, instructional, marketing, admin, billing, and organization. When the easy stuff is handled, this allows maximum creativity and freedom in other areas. And then I give a couple core value stories for that. And then the final one is pursue simplicity. Instead of indiscriminate action, discover the one thing that will get the most amount of results, the one email, the one technique, the one best practice that provides 95% of the results. I don't believe in overcomplicating things. I like things to be very, very simple. So those were the three core values that I felt most embodied how I wanted to run my private studio. The reason I make such a big deal about those is because I want to show the decision-making guidelines now, and I want to highlight the difference between what they are. Decision-making guidelines could also be called core rules. These are the core rules of the business, so that as you are making, if you are a team member, as you are making decisions in the business, as I said earlier, if you could go one direction versus if you have choice A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, how do you know which one? A lot of times, these decision-making guidelines will tell you or demonstrate for you the way that it should go. And once again, I've got them on screen. If you're watching, if you're listening, you can kind of see them all. You could even pause and like read them because I'm not going to read through all these. But this tells you how to operate in the day-to-day operations of the business. And these aren't from the heart. You will hear that they are a little bit more in the head. So like double check your work. Yeah, they're pragmatic. Before you send an email, before you send invoices, when putting an appointment on the calendar, so many silly mistakes can be avoided when attention to detail and care are exercised. It creates peace and harmony. Here's another one. Write down tasks. The beginning of creativity is eliminating stupid distractions from the brain. Don't allow yourself to go through your workday in a haze of distractions. Write down what needs to be done and then set aside times to bang out those tasks. The mind was created for creating ideas, not holding them. You've heard me say that on this podcast before. That was a rule. And here's why. I literally was on a coaching call earlier today with a client, and they didn't write down something I told them to do last time, and they were getting ready to bring up a topic in the coaching call for me to coach them on. And I literally said, I told you all this last time. And the person started to protest, like, oh, no, we didn't talk about this last time. And I literally went into the transcript from my last call, and I copied and pasted. I was like, look, I gave you these instructions, this, and this. And then they said, oh, I didn't write it down.
Yeah, right. Well, that's part of the coaching right there. You're like,
right.
Hey, here's how we're gonna level up.
Yeah.
This is the brain. I love this. I love how clear and pragmatic it is. We do not have decision-making guidelines at Brooklyn Music Factory, but we do have guidelines within projects. So whenever we create a project, we'll say, what's the evidence of success? How are we going to operate within that project, et cetera? And it's sort of similar-ish. You were talking about how values aren't something that you chose either to be hip or that you thought sounded good. These are literally the ones that you are trying to live by yourself. And you're
not trying.
Yeah.
No, they are who I am.
They are who you are.
There is no effort. Yes, there is no effort for me to do that because it's just how I operate.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about some exercises on how to find those yourself. If you're listening and going, well, I'm not quite sure. And that's normal. It's normal for people who haven't really been like, hey, I need to codify these and write these down and start learning how to share them in stories with others. It's normal not to necessarily be able to just rattle them off right away. However, we're going to give you a couple of exercises to do that. And I want to clarify one thing in terms of how it was taught to me. You'll notice that if you were watching, Daniel's got a handful of those core values. Doesn't have like 24. Doesn't have 36 of them. He's got a handful. And I remember once I was doing an exercise with one of my coaches, and she said, okay, I'm setting a timer. What I want you to do is I want you to write down all of your core values right now. Values, these are just intentions that you have that you live by. And you have exactly 3 minutes. Just write. She set a timer and I just wrote. And then when the timer went off, she said, "Okay, great, Nate. How many do you have?" And I was like, "Well, I got stuck at about 18, but I made it to about 26." She's like, "Okay, great. Now I'm going to set a timer for 1 minute, and you have to pick the five that are the most important to you." And it was a fascinating exercise because it's very hard. It's sort of like your desert island, album list. Like, what are you going to bring? What are you going to leave? But it's really hard to narrow it down. And the reason why I share that story is because, it's a great exercise for you to do when you hang up, when you're done with this pod and you've got a little brain space. But number two, your staff and teachers can't handle a laundry list of 24 values that you're trying to live by. It's too much. It's overwhelmed. They'll never know them all. You'll never be good at telling the stories about them, and you'll never really be able to hold everyone accountable to them. And when I was trained on this, they were like, the absolute max is 10, but it would be way better if you could have 5 to 7 or even fewer. And essentially, they're saying, look, you're trying to organize a community of people that will operate under these values. Back to your, one of your cores there, core rules is like, keep it simple. The way I was trained on it was like, Nate, you're going to have to make tough choices. And in our case, it's like me and my business partner, Pira. So we were obviously raised and had different values, right? It wasn't a single founder. So we had to come to an agreement and a consensus on these 7 core values that we ended with. So I just wanted to add that to be clear, when your first iteration of these core values, for those of you that are listening that don't really have them yet, it's great if you have 3 to 7, somewhere in there, right?
I think personally it would be very valuable to see something that was coded more towards a larger school. We try to help everyone across the spectrum of studio ownership.
Yep.
I think what I showed there is probably better for a smaller school. I'd love to see what you have for a bigger school, or I'd love to show the audience because obviously I've seen it.
Totally. I'm going to do this for us.
Okay.
Can I share my screen? Yeah, I'm going to share my screen. I'm actually going to share. I typed into Google Brooklyn Music Factory's core values, and I wanted to see what it came up with. And it gave us this great overview. It's like BMI. It gave us an overview. It gave us the key features of the company, what makes our school unique. This is all about purpose. We're going to talk some about that in a future app. It went down and it said it has the following. It has a very clear mission. And then right down here in a succinct area, it has Brooklyn Music Factory's core values. I love this. By the way, for you listening, this is going to be one of your evidences of success. When you actually have your core values, and it's pervading your website, you have your purpose, your mission pervading your website. And when you do a Google search, it comes right up there in a summary. You know you will have done the work and you will have applied the work. So 7 core values: be the best version of yourself, very much like yours, be the
Oh yeah.
best, right? Second one I already read: be 100% engaged emotionally and intellectually. That is a very Nate Shaw core value. Like,
That's also very true.
you and I have been in the room where I'm like, are we 100% here? It's like,
Yeah.
find joy in every day in every way. Discover everyone's story. That one right there is very much a Pira, my partner's core value. I love that one. Discover everyone's story. Communicate consistently to gain trust. Check your ego at the door. That's hopefully our listeners feel that that's a Nate Shaw core value. Check your ego at the door because it's really important to me. And then finally, build community. So those are our
I
7
love
core
that.
values.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
Um,
Nate, the thing that strikes me about these, they are very much you. They're very much BMF. And, even though when we define these for ourselves, we didn't even know each other.
right.
Um, when, and obviously we didn't define them for each other, but we define them separately because, again, they're a reflection of who we are and how we think things should run, how we intend to comport ourselves in professional and personal relationships, what we think should be true, the world that we're trying to create. We're creating a little world for ourselves in our
Mm.
business, and we're trying to create a world around certain values that we hold. And it's just interesting because in yours, I don't even have to see any more than those kind of headlines. Like I already know how you define them. I can already imagine stories coming up. I can imagine situations between you and me where you embodied those values. Maybe
Mm.
in a moment of tension between us, or when we were trying to create something together. To go more towards the positive end. And so it is just interesting too, because again, I feel that those are more from the heart than the head. Although there's obviously implications for the head, just like in mine. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to point that out.
Can I share when you were reading your core rules and
Hmm.
you were saying A, write tasks down, B, keep it simple. In all the work that we've done together on the pod, in the Founders Forum, collaboratively coaching, etc. One of the areas that's been a really beneficial to me is in the simplicity piece,
Mm.
actually, because I can, we've done a lot of this together now. You know, um, we've
Live
hosted lots of
events.
owners in Brooklyn,
Yeah.
all kinds of
Yeah.
events. And one of the things I keep taking away every time we do a post-mortem, I'm like, oh, Nate, in order for this to really operate the way Daniel imagines it, we have to simplify in some way. Either we're giving too much content, we need less content, etc. And it's like it's really beneficial, actually. When you're working with someone and you're beginning to understand how they operate and some of the sort of the intentions that they bring to the table. Um, the benefit is that it can help transform the way you operate,
Mm.
right? And
Yes.
so this is the piece that I think, as owners who are listening now and are trying to codify their values, I hope you'll take this with you, which is that as you get those written down, as you start to try to convince others that this is the way we're going to be doing things, this is one of your gifts to them.
Mm.
Right? It's not just money, community, a job, all these things. Like culture is one of the main reasons why your community of teachers and staff are going to stick by you for years, right? So the values piece is so important. It's what makes someone say, "Hey, I want to be at Brooklyn Music Factory, not as a job, but as an opportunity and a career." It's a very important distinction. um,
Mm.
we're not hiring people that we hope will just work for us. We're hiring people that we hope will build something with us,
Mm.
and that's a key distinction. Okay, Daniel, so I think the key here is to just kind of close with some simple ways to get our listeners going on this, right?
I love that.
You don't have, you know what I mean? Like we when it was taught to me, probably taught to you, it can feel overwhelming at first. It also can feel so abstract. Hopefully, we've shown our listeners today how useful they can be, right, and how essential they are. It's not an
Mm.
option, right? You can't choose to someday maybe get your values in up on the wall. You got to get those values up on the wall. You got to get them written down. So you don't have to get them perfect. You just got to get them going. So let me share a couple of ways that work for Pira and I when we develop them. Number one, just obviously I already mentioned it, but if you do have a partner, obviously it's a collaborative exercise, right? You're not
Mm.
creating a school that's just your values. You're creating a school that is the co-founders, right? And so there's a couple of ways that you can kind of unstick yourself. The first is kind of getting back to what you said, Daniel, which is like what's already in your being that you wake up every morning and you say, you set an intention of some kind, right? Those are some of the values that are already right there and they're the most prevalent. So the very first exercise I would do is literally just be like, I'm the timer exercise that was done with me by my coach is just actually sit down and write. Don't think it through, but literally start writing. For example, like perseverance. And then you could do a little story like, why is perseverance important to me? Well, I always, I'm someone who I don't ever give up. I didn't give up when I was on the basketball team in high school, and I don't give up now, or whatever it is, like just write. Um, Okay, so that exercise is great. I love the idea of making a list of values. I love the idea of writing little stories for yourself. Keep in mind that nobody's looking at this. It's like your journal. So you really have to just honor the process and not get nervous about whether someone's going to call you out on anything. Just make this your own private Idaho. This is your own private exercise. Okay, the second exercise that's really useful that was taught to me is to actually rewind tape and think, what are some of the values that you grew up with in your family or in that environment that you were raised in? Like, what are the values that you just have always equated with, say, your mom, your dad, that uncle that was so important to you, that grandfather that helped raise you? Like I pulled up an Evernote around that, and some of the things were like, creativity was number one. My mom was an artist her whole life, and every single day she would hand me something to create with. If I ever said I was bored, she literally had those like different colored clays in her purse. She would pull out a hunk of clay and be like, make something anytime I said I was bored. Right. So maybe nowadays we'd hand them a phone or something, but my mom never, ever would have done that. Even when smartphones were around, she wouldn't have done that. To her, it was like, use your hands, create. So that's the second exercise that I highly recommend, which is go back to your family, really rewind tape and think, what are some of the things that were just ingrained in me, that are just a core part of my being now, and write those down, and then start writing stories about who taught you those values. That can be a super valuable way. And then the final step in this whole process is you're going to have to reduce it. I promise you, when you get rolling, you're going to end up with way more values than your company can handle. so Daniel, any thoughts on how to shrink that sucker down to that nice, concise list that you had?
Well, it's interesting because I'm going to add one more.
Okay, good.
And then I'm going to answer your question. Think about what lights you up, what makes you irrationally excited, what brings you enormous amounts of joy. Write that down. And then think about what creates negative emotion for you: anger, fear, things of that nature. A lot can be mined in those two, in that yin and yang, and then in terms of how do you boil it down, I don't think in the discovery or brainstorming process you should, as Nate said, I don't think you should be trying to edit. I don't think you should be going for brevity.
No, not at all.
We're literally doing the work that is going to set the foundation for an incredibly strong and healthy business. And frankly, if you're confused, you're like, I don't know really what I stand for. You need it more than most. For me, when I wrote those, it was actually because of work I'd done professionally previous to when I worked with this one particular mentor. These actually came pretty easy for me. I banged that thing out in like a day. It did not take a lot of work for me. Like I knew exactly what my values were, and I knew what my decision-making guidelines should be, although they did get modified over the years. That's obviously the final version. So how do you boil it down? I will say this. And this, again, I think in terms of the assignment, I think having a document like that in front of you where several examples of that, or going online using a simple Google search and looking up ways that people write these out, can be enormously helpful, because you begin to write in that style, and
Mm.
then it's quite easy. But the actual values themselves, and then the sentence or two after it, it's only a couple sentences. Some of those were only 2 lines for me. The core value stories are obviously much easier to write because you can write however you want.
Mm.
But in terms of the core values, I would I'd put a little more attention into that and how you write it and think thoughtfully there. The stories won't be as hard to write. But in terms of boiling it down, I would boil it down. I boiled it down to 3. Nate, you boiled it down to 7. It could be 5. It could be 6. I think much above 7, you're getting into shaky territory.
Yeah.
To be quite honest, but with the decision making guidelines, I'll just be very quick on this. With the decision making guidelines, I don't think there's a limit to that. There were some businesses who were in the cohort with that mentor that I went through that had like literally 20 decision making guidelines.
Mm.
I had 8 originally, and then I added 2 more over the next 2 years
Mm.
because I would every once in a while go back and update it. Every time I brought on a new team member, I would go and read through it again. I'm like, what are they reading here? Is this still accurate? Is this still
Right. Yeah.
is this still relevant? You were going to say something, though, Nate.
Well, I always find it useful to be like, you've got a list of 12 things that you hope to do in a day. And you
Mm-hmm.
say, if I could only get one thing done, what would it be? It's the same with your values. Like, you're going to look at this laundry list of values, which is great that you flexed your creativity and you wrote them all down and you got things down on paper. I would start by saying, if there was only one value that you were going to bring to your music school tomorrow, what would it be? And now you have a single core value. And then maybe you say, I'm going to add 3 more in a month. What are those 3 going to be that I'm going to start talking about? But don't go for more than 5 to start. And one last thing is, we were just sitting in Brooklyn with a bunch of founders from our founders forum, and we're having our barbecue lunch on the second day, and one of the great members of the forum had her values, and she's like, Nate, I've got the values, but they don't quite feel right. And I was like, well, tell me about them. And she read them to me, and they did feel like she had written values in the correct way. She's like, I believe in these values, but they sounded sort of canned and corporate. And I was like, I gotta be honest, those don't actually sound like your voice, But like, Daniel, you opened with "Be the Best." That kind of feels like you. Like, there's like a boom, 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 boom. Like, you are you are concise. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that feels like your find joy in every day in every way. That's very much more Nate. It's kind of like it's sort of like rolling off in a different wavy way, you
Yeah.
know? And so you do want to write these values in your voice. And we're not going to give you an exercise on that, except for to say that, read them to your trusted friend and be like,
Mm.
does this sound like me?
Yeah. Can I say one other thing?
Yeah, totes.
Nate, you've been in the same business for a decade and a half now.
Mm-hmm.
And in that decade and a half, I've run a couple different businesses. And I will tell you that the core values for Grow Your Music Studio are different than my studio, because
Mm.
that business brings something different out of me, and it's in a different market, and it's with different customers, clients. So there are parts of me that were not accessed in my studio business that I won't say weren't appropriate. They weren't brought out in that business.
Mm.
Part of the reason why I ended that business, because I wasn't feeling challenged anymore. I wasn't feeling motivated anymore. It's why I eventually, I was running at one point the studio and Grow Your Music Studio at the same time. But then I saw that I could get everything that I wanted out of life and business and job satisfaction every day in Grow in a more full way than I could in just the studio alone. And so it was an easy decision to make, and not just for that reason. It was an easy decision to make on many, many levels, although I was sad to see the students go. That was the hard part. The point being that you're not just trying to catalog every little thing about yourself. It's what does this business bring out of you? That's part of it too.
Love it. Yeah, that's a nice addition. And we are changing. So it's fair to say that the person that started your music studio in whatever year that was, that's a,
2004.
yeah, that's a different Daniel than right now.
Absolutely.
You've developed core values that are really important to you right now.
Absolutely. I'm older, wiser, more agreeable, actually.
More agreeable. Okay, well that's episode 2 of our how many part series? 6-part series?
I think it's going to be 7, but
7.
there's stuff that we had planned to talk about in this episode that we didn't even talk about, so it might even go to 8 now. I don't know.
Yeah, but by the time you're done listening to this, friends, you are absolutely going to be both inspired and motivated to get that culture correct in your school. And it'll have a profound influence on your program. Maybe not 6 months from now, but 1 to 3 years from now, you will be feeling the difference.